Hey, what's up? This is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for watching this video. I want to talk about how to get the right drum sounds for the music that you're making. As a matter of fact, I want to share with you 6 things that can help you achieve the perfect drums that you're looking for when producing your own music. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Let's talk about sound selection. And finding the right drum samples to begin with plays a huge role in getting the feel and vibe that you're looking for in your projects. When I started out producing music at the very beginning, I just used whatever I had on hand and just made beats and threw it in. And I didn't really put much thought into, does this kick match with this snare, or does it even really matter? And technically, you can use any sounds you want put together. But there are certain sounds that, when blended together, can really help or take away from the mood that you might be looking for. So, for instance, here I have some pads. Let me just play them for you. So, pretty chill, and that's kind of the vibe, right? So now I want to go ahead and play this Ableton Live drum rack filled with a couple sounds here. And this is just a stock drum kit, meaning that it's a kit of sounds put together. And what I'm going to do is just play. I'm going to play a pattern using a kick and a snare. And you're going to see the mood that it adds to the pads. Now you see there, we've got a boxy and a big sounding snare, like a warehouse or a big type of kick. Now that it works. I'm not saying that it's wrong, and it's more of it's not a principle. It's more of a preference for me, like what sounds to choose. But look at the difference that we use the same pattern, but yet with different sounds, and see what it does to the overall move and vibe. So let's take this kick here. Let's put our headphone mode and browse and find another, let's say this one over here. And let's change the snare from this big warehouse snare to something a little bit much smaller or simple in its sustain and release. So like that knock. Let's take the same pattern and see what we get. So changes the vibe completely. Now what I'm gonna do is just adjust the velocity of that knock, because it seems to be a little bit overpowering than the kick. So with all these knocks selected, let's just drag the velocity down. And let's get the kick, or in this case a tom, and bring that up. And let's just balance this out a little bit more. So that alone paints a different picture, and it actually sets up the mood a little better with these pads. It's a great opportunity for some verse melodies to sit on top of that and really kind of paint the picture a lot better. And the first time we had it could work, but it could also work to maybe just lift and add more energy to a specific section. Maybe we can bring those drums in for a chorus. And that might actually work because it adds much more excitement to it. And what I mean by that is it's just actually a little bit more energy. This is a little bit more laid back and chill. So let's copy this pattern here. I'm going to copy it down, and I'm going to replace it with that same, the original kick. And let's get this and put it back with that snare drum. And there we go. And now let's listen to both of them and see which one captures the mood. What mood does or So you can see the difference there. So if we want to maybe lift or add some more instrumentation and have the drums just really cut through, we can probably switch to the more acoustic warehousey type of drums. But if we want to scale it back and give some more of the atmosphere and vibe, we can have the more tonal drums and you know, with the one we have here with the tom and that little knock. Now, once again, You could choose any drum sounds you want to use in your project. It is your own personal preference and it is subjective. But I want you to understand the role that choosing the right sounds can play in achieving the mood that you're looking for when writing your own music. Now, if you're asking yourself, like, what more or less drum sounds should I be using for this particular mood? That's where having a good reference comes into play, like using a reference, maybe music that you're inspired by, maybe something that's in the lane of the music that you're trying to write. Right. So if you're doing a drum and bass track, you're probably going to use some drum and bass tracks as a reference and listening and dial in the drum sounds that you hear in there. If you're doing a pop, mid-tempo thing, which is kind of along the lines of what we're doing here, then yeah, you would look to other songs that might fit that same vein and, try to figure out what sounds are in that ballpark. And that's really where it comes down to, like, reference it, anchor your ideas and your inspiration from your reference, and that would give you a more of a blueprint as to what type of drum sounds that you could be using. So that plays a big role in achieving the vibe that you're ultimately looking for. Now, another question I get asked a lot is, should I be tuning my drums? Should I be changing the pitch of my drums so that it fits the key signature that I'm currently working in? Well, honestly, I don't do a lot of drum tuning. A lot of the drum sounds that I'm using are very straightforward and don't really need to be tuned. But yet, when you come across drum sounds that have a very strong tonal pitch presence, such as the tom that we're using as a kick drum pattern here, you might want to consider changing the pitch of those sounds so that it fits within the key signature working in. For instance, here's the tom. And the pitch is really resonating and very evident there, but not so much on this kick drum. Even though technically the kick drum has some kind of frequency that it's strong in and a pitch. And we can see that by just dragging a tuner right over the drums. And we don't really get anything, but when we hit the tom, we see a note visibly present there, right? Nothing much on the tuner, but on the warehouse kick, but yet that tom is very, you can see there's a tonal presence there. So what I want to do is go to that tom and then transpose that down so that it matches the overall pitch and fits in the key that we're working in. So I'm going to play the pads, lower the pads down a little bit, and then play the pattern and pitch down the tom. So I'm using my transpose knob to do that in real time while I'm listening to the pattern. And then I can go into the controls, and if I need to do any slight detuning, I can do that right underneath the transposition. So if it's just like a hair flat or hair sharp, I can use. And that's fine. It's showing that it's an F sharp, and that's good because the chords that I'm doing and the key that I'm in is an F sharp major. So that fits in just fine. Doesn't need to be precisely head on, but yet the difference from going 3 semitones to where it was originally really helps kind of have the drums sit in the right place. Now let's talk about layering your drums. It's a great way to add the depth that you might be missing with your drums in your music. If your drums come across stiff and a little bit bland, try layering it and you'd be surprised with the results that you're going to be getting. So for instance, here we have just the regular tom and the knock that we've added. Now what I want to do is add some more beef to the bottom end with the tom. Now I could easily just use an EQ, try to find some of the low end and give it a boost, but yet that's going to alter the overall tone and where the tom is sitting right now. It's easier to just layer that tom or the kick drum pattern that we have with the tom sample with another kick drum that will have some of that beef and lower end. So when I'm browsing for a kick drum to layer with this, that's what I'm looking for. I'm keeping, I want something with some good bottom end beef that I can add to this. Not too long or too big like an 808, like a long 808 sub, but just something with some good beef and bottom end. So this one's good. I'm getting this from this Beat Academy sample pack, which you can download absolutely for free. It comes with all these one-shots and a bunch of construction kits. So what I'm going to do is create a MIDI track by just holding Command-Shift-T, drag and drop that onto the MIDI track on the bottom, and that's going to load up that drum sound on the MIDI on the MIDI track. And then I'm going to copy the pattern, holding Option, dragging that over, and double click this and make sure that the kick drum pattern right here, it's just going to play E1. So that's going to be really, really pitched down. So let's eliminate that snare drum because that's the snare drum pattern. And let's move this G1 note a couple octaves higher and bring it right down to C3. That's playing the sample at its root note, the original state that the sample is in. So here is the kick pattern. And we're going to just solo this. Now you can hear a bit of that tonal presence in this as well. I can show you by putting a tuner. You see how it's there, it's showing G. So this is one of those times where, hey, I might actually have to tune this. I'm going to tune it down to hit that F sharp. And there you go. So I just want one semitone down. And that's just because, again, this has a tonal presence in there. Now I want to just cut some frequency off. So it's just focusing on that lower end, that low end. And what I want to do is layer this with the tom pattern now. It's like once you hear that layered kick drum in there, you don't want to ever go back. The toms sounded so empty. And we didn't feel that way at first because when we started off, we just only had the tom and that knock as a reference. But now you add that beefy bottom end kick layered with it, it's like, oh wow, this is how it's supposed to feel. And that's really cool. That's important. Now, another thing that can really help your drums just jump out of the mix and just feel more glued together is adding saturation and harmonic distortion. So things like overdrive or any type of distortion plugins can really help bring a lot of the nuances from those drums to light. So for instance, let's focus on this kick drum, and I'm gonna use ABleton Live Saturator. With the soft clip turned on, I'm just gonna go ahead and just crank up the drive. So it's adding that extra harmonic saturation. I'm gonna open up the frequency cutoff here on the sample a little bit. And maybe change from analog clip to soft sine. That's going to change the algorithm and the shaping of the slope of the distortion. That's nice and beefy. Now layer that with the other drums. It's like night and day. The minute we take that kick drum that has a saturator on there, you totally feel its absence. Now, let's go to that first drum rack. And in this case, let's use overdrive. So we're going to add some overdrive to those drums. And that's going to help just bring out a lot of the initial transients of both the tom and that knock. Now, here's another thing I want to focus in, and that's overall sonic balance within your drums. Now, me personally, I like going for this seesaw effect in which there's some contrast between the elements I have. So I've got a nice, juicy, big, fat kick, and we've got this nice, small, short rim knock. And so if they were on a seesaw, the kick is just weighing that down and the knock is like all the way over here. And I like that contrast because if we have just a big kick and then a big snare, they start to just even each other out and it doesn't draw a lot of contrast there. So that's just something that I like doing and it just gives off a really cool vibe. Also is the shaping of our sounds. If we notice that tom that we're using, if I can just bring the sustain down of that sound, it will give more breathing room to the actual beefy kick that we just added. So let's focus on that. Now, a sustain is such an amazing thing to control, especially with your kick drums or drums all around. It can really help just shorten it and create that nice contrast between the elements of your drums. So I'm going to leave the sustain there for that tom because I like where it's at. And now I want to use some effects to create some dimension. So going over to that knock, let's go and highlight that. And let's place a reverb directly onto it. We're going to insert a reverb. So I'll use the Ableton Live stock reverb and I'll put it right onto that. And so if we, now that creates some space and dimension for that knock. It bridges the gap really well between in the pattern from the kick drum to the actual snare. But I think what I did was I've added a reverb on the whole drum kit. So I'm just going to click that reverb, move it over so it only affects the knock. Now we can just go ahead and mess around with the settings here. So I'll tune the dry and wet down a little bit, maybe the decay. Maybe it's just going on for too long. And what that also does is it creates dimension. That means that that knock isn't so dry and in your face. So the drier the sound is, the less reverb on it, the more upfront in the mix. And the wetter with reverb, the farther it feels in the mix as well. And now we can also, just as we did layer the kick drum, can also layer this with another sound. So I'll go ahead and head over to drums, go to the rim section. I'll go ahead and use this. And I'm trying to look for something similar, nothing that will overshadow or take the spotlight away from the original knock. So we'll just copy that pattern. And once again here is the knock pattern. So I'll erase the kick pattern from here, select the actual snare drum or the knock, and move that up a couple octaves. And here we have the pattern. Now this is just a short little knock here, and it's dry, no reverb on it. So let's do the same thing. Let's add some overdrive to this. And now put it all together. Now we're going to add a little bit more saturation and some compression, but we're going to add this to all the drum sounds together. And this is going to give a nice cohesive sonic balance to all the drum sounds. So I just basically selected the kick, the rim, and the drum rack and grouped them by hitting Command G, and we get our own little group track. You could treat this or call it a drum bus as well. So I'll do that, drum bus. And now let's go ahead and I'm going to use Ableton Live's drum bus plugin. And this is because it comes with multiple things that we're going to want to use, such as a drive and adding some crunch, some distortion to the mid frequencies. And we have an EQ here, just a high cut, so we can make it a little bit warmer. And we can actually boost some of the low end here. So I like using this plugin, but you can achieve the same thing by using multiple plugins. And there's a video on the channel that shows you how to do this, even on Logic. So let's go ahead and check out what we have so far. So does a big difference here. So we're adding just a little bit of drive, a little bit of crunch. I'm going to dampen the EQ, warm it up a little, and then the transient knob to just bring out a little bit more of the punchiness and the initial transit we hear in the kick and the knock. And I'm not going to boost up any of the boom. I think it's good where it's at. I might even dial everything back a little bit from 100% wet and scale it down and to my liking. All right, and now let's use Ableton Live's glue compressor. And this is going to help sandwich all the drums together so we get a nice cohesive dynamic performance from the drums. So I want a slow attack so that it doesn't take away the initial punchiness that we're getting, but yet and I want a quick release so that once it does compress, it'll just let go of the signal immediately. And so I like where it's at now. And you could really hear it where the kick drum kind of comes down a little bit. He's the loudest one, so he comes down and it just balances everything else. It kind of brings it and gives a nice balance overall to the drums. So this is without it. It's funny because with the compressor on, it feels like the kick's more present, but really what's happening is the knock becomes more present. So the ceiling's lowering, so the tallest guy in the room has to duck a little bit, making everybody else who's really short seem like they're about the same height, if that makes any sense. And that's what's going on here with the compressor. Now, with the principles that I shared in this video, it can really help you get the drums that you're looking for no matter what genre of music you're working on. We started off with sound selection and how important it is to choose the right sounds to begin with, because depending on the drum blend that you're using, that can alter the mood or the vibe that you're looking for in your music. And then layering your drums can be a great way to get the ultimate sound that you're looking for rather than trying to squeeze it out of just one drum sample. And then we mentioned how adding harmonic distortion could go a long way in bringing out some of the nuances of those drums and really make them come alive. And then grouping them all together to treat them as one cohesive, overall balanced sound. I hope this video was helpful and encouraging. And as my gift to you for watching, I'd love to send you the sample pack that I've mentioned earlier, which includes the one-shots and construction kits and loops that you can use freely in your music. It's 100% royalty free. That means that you can use it in the music that you're making and share it with the rest of the world. All you got to do is just click the link below in the description box or visit beatacademy.com/pack and download this pack today. Well, thanks for watching. You definitely want to subscribe and hit the like button so more of my videos, if you found it helpful, can show up in your feed and you'd stay up to date with upcoming videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.